More fighting in the streets of Tbilisi, the capital of the former Soviet Republic of Georgia. We take a look at that today with Dan Kovalik. He's an American human rights and labor lawyer based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, who teaches international human rights at the University of Pittsburgh School of Law. We spoke with him via Skype on Thursday. Dan, thanks for your time. Watching what's going on. We've been watching what's going on in Tbilisi. What looks like an attempted Maidan coup 2.0. People have been describing it, that are looking at it from outside the United States, as an attempt to open a second front in the war against Russia, basically using Georgia as the piece of real estate from which to do that. The lay of the land might allow that. It's like a 55-45 Russia versus EU orientation politically in the country. And the thing that's curious is that the issue that they're raising here, unlike alleged membership in the EU that was raised in Ukraine, which, by the way, still hasn't happened 9 years later, is over a foreign agents registration law that Human Rights Watch says is horrible and a denial of freedom and all of this, but in fact is a tame version of the law that exists in the United States that's used even today to prosecute people.
Yeah, no, it's a very strange thing that's happening for the reason you say. As I understand it, the law in Georgia, which I guess was just passed, or at least it was passed by the parliament. I guess it has not been signed by the executive yet, would require people and groups that get 20% or more of their funding to register as foreign agents or suffer certain penalties, which seems like a fairly reasonable law on its face. But even putting that aside, my guess is it doesn't apply to that many people. I mean, very few people are going to be impacted by this. So the fact there are like very big and violent protests over it makes you wonder why. Why do people care about this? Right. As you said, we've had this sort of law in the book for who knows long, for
Since
years.
1938.
Yeah, there you go. I don't think very few people in this country even know it's on the books or care, because most people don't get 20% or more of their funding from foreign agents. Now, there isn't that type of threshold in the U.S. law. I don't think it specifies really. It's a little more vague on what a foreign agent is, and that's how people get actually in trouble with it, because it's really left to the eye of the beholder, which means the eye of the prosecutor. But at least in Georgia, it's a little more specific. At least you know kind of what it means.
I mean, here, for example, just to amplify your point that it could be a little confusing here, in 2019, like a couple of years ago, Skadden Arps, like one of the biggest law firms in the universe, got ensnared in it for violating FARA because they contributed to a public relations campaign directed at members of the news media, blah, 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 on behalf of Ukraine.
Yeah, and I mean, again, as you and I discussed before the show, when you look at the type of people that are prosecuted for this, it tends to be people getting support from the U.S.'s sworn adversaries like Russia, China. Rarely would someone who gets support from Israel, and there's tons of people in that category, are they prosecuted, right? Even though Israel has an amazing amount of leverage and influence over elected representatives, even takes a bunch of freshman congresspeople to Israel.
That's right.
Every 2 years. So, but that doesn't seem to be a problem for the U.S. or it doesn't seem to be a problem for the U.S. government that Saudi Arabia would be funding, tons of things. So it is really this, and to that extent, I would argue as a lawyer that it's probably even unconstitutional for vagueness, because it's, again, really left to the prosecutors to decide on their own prerogative who violates it or not. Right. So again, to that extent, it seems like the Georgia law is more concrete and more fair. And again, it's just bizarre that people are protesting it in this way. It doesn't seem to make any sense at all that this is the hill people are going to die on, right? But that is happening. I mean, when you look at the videos, the protests are very vigorous, and there's riot police tear gassing people, and people going to the hospital, and you're wondering why all the fuss? And it does make you think that something else is afoot there.
Yeah, one of the things that's afoot is that the protesters, quote unquote, are bringing Molotov cocktails to the protest like they did at the Maidan.
Yeah, which again makes you think actually they're being supported by outside influence, probably mostly from the U.S. That, of course, is I don't know, is that ironic in this case? Maybe, but it clearly there's something there, and it makes sense. It does make sense. I mean, the U.S. has been involved in a color revolution, at least one in Georgia, and of course in Ukraine as well. I mean, the U.S. not even since, I mean, even when the Soviet Union existed, was meddling in those republics, and certainly since the Soviet Union collapsed, the U.S. has continued to meddle in them to, molest Russia.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm looking at the piece at hrw.org, Human Rights Watch's piece on this on March 7th. And they're characterizing this thing, again, as like an affront to democracy. And, among the fact pattern that they talk about, there was a massive protest and 36 people were arrested. Now, I've been to like the RNC and DNC every year, going back 20 years at least. And I would say the hour that 36 people got arrested was a pretty good hour for protesters. This is commonplace here. The Occupy people, the Black Lives Matter people, all the different protests in the United States. If there's a mass of people out there on the order of the crowd that's assembled in Tbilisi, 36 people is de minimis. And when people are throwing fireballs, they're starting fires in the street and they're trying to burn buildings down. It seems to me that that the police have an obligation to arrest some people and to try to chill it out. I'm watching this, by the way, watching also the footage that they're showing of what happened on January 6th, 2021 in Washington, D.C. Nothing was burning there. And that was described and still is described as like the most heinous crime in the history of the universe. And
they've arrested a bunch of people there who did nothing but, walk into the Capitol. Some apparently escorted by, U.S. security forces.
Yeah, they got the horns, right? Yeah.
So no, it's very, very strange. I think that one has to really look at what's happening in Georgia with the jaundiced eye. And again, I wonder whether there's some sort of foreign intervention here. I think that's pretty clear. And again, Human Rights Watch, honestly, and I can say this because I teach international human rights, Human Rights Watch really is an arm of the U.S. State Department. They really, help pave the way for interventions by the United States. I do not see them as some dispassionate arbiter of what human rights are around the world.
Agreed. I think most of the world sees it the same way. The only issue I would take with you on that is, rather than an arm, maybe some other appendage. But
yeah, there's something. Yes, they're the handmaiden of the U.S. State Department.
That's correct. All right. Thank you, Dan, so much for your time. And we will speak with you again soon.
Thank you, Don.
For KPFK, I'm Don DeBar.